There we go.
Hello.
Hello, hello, Andrew. Good to see you.
Hi. You too. You too. How is everything?
Everything is well. Everything is well. And it's so great to see you again, Andrew. What are we doing today?
Well, likewise, Jane. And today we've got a really fun one. We'd agreed to watch Enola Holmes 1 and 2 and just see what we thought about this rather playful re-examination of the world of Sherlock Holmes and the people in his life. I, did you have fun watching the films? Because I certainly did.
I thought they were brilliant. I thought they were maybe aimed a little bit at a younger audience at first, but I actually found them really engaging. And they were a really fun take on the traditional Sherlock Holmes stories. And I think it allowed for, I mean, they're books, we should probably say that, by American author Nancy Springer. She did, oh, is it nine now, plus a short story, I think,
Yeah.
Stories of Enola, and two movies now. And that, yeah, the movies, there are certain artistic freedoms, but generally they sum up Enola's universe really well. And we get some really interesting new takes on the well-known characters in Sherlock Holmes, not just Sherlock, also his brother Mycroft. And they are more probably family people in this one because they have a younger sister now they have to look after a little bit. But we do get Enola as the main character, which is great fun. And we still get, your usual detective stories and deciphering and deductions going on. How did you find them, Andrew?
I really liked them. I loved how playful they were. There is threat, there is danger, there are some faintly scary bad guys, particularly in the second film. But at the same time, it's just this really quite light-hearted homage to the literature. And just sort of to the 1890s, aside from the gloomy bits like the factory in the second film and a couple of other, dingy parts, you get this slightly, I mean, possibly a bit over idealized sort of, bright light, lots of color, just this view of 1890s Britain, but with a few modernish sensibilities injected. But I think they struck a good balance there. And I know some people might raise an eyebrow at my use of the word homage, because I know, as always, with literature as sacred as, Conan Doyle's works, there are people who go, I don't know about this. But I think the books and the films are very much a sort of an appreciation of Sherlock Holmes, and an opportunity to bolt on a really fun story to his caravan, as it were. What did you think?
And I think, no, that's a really good point, Andrew. And I think you also right when you say, Sherlock Holmes have been depicted in so many different ways, movies and TV shows over the years. And I think that is the genius of the books, that you can spin it in all sorts of directions. And there is a reason why so many other detectives as well have been somehow, I think, inspired by the original Conan Doyle stories and Sherlock Holmes in many ways, because many detectives really do have a link back to Sherlock Holmes and his way of thinking or his way of being, and this sort of this idea of the lone detective who is a genius but can't really figure out how to exist in social circles,
Yes.
which is always a good story. But there is a reason why some stories keep being relevant, and you can modernize them and make spin-off of spin-offs and all of that. And it's because at the core foundation, they're just really, really good stories. And I think still, when you go back and read them, the original stories, they are still brilliant stories. They're really, really well written. And they give you a picture into not just the psychology of sometimes in Sherlock's case, extreme minds, but also a view into this particular time and era that's very interesting as well. And I actually think Enola Holmes, the Enola Holmes stories, do the same in their own way, because obviously what we don't get in the original Sherlock stories is the female perspective and female life of this era, But that is what Enola Holmes can give us, and that's certainly what we get, especially in the second movie, where we get the story of the first match factory strike in, am I
Yes.
right in saying 1888? I think around that time, that was the match factory strike, and I love how they weave those historical events into this imaginary world.
Yes, it's brilliantly done, and it does anchor it quite nicely, I think, because in the first film it was something as subtle as Enola's date of birth in the opening scene, and then she says, "Oh, however many years later," and so I go, "Oh yes, right. So the year is roughly this when our story takes place," and but you're right. I do love how the story of the match factory strike was woven into the second film, and it does throughout both films. They do gently in the first film, somewhat more heavy-handedly in the second film. They link it to the suffragette story and the importance of that movement.
That's true. That which was, a very significant historical event, but that's the opportunity that you have when you have a female main character. But I also wanted to ask you, Andrew, actually, how did you feel about the well-known characters and the way they were portrayed? Because when we look at the original, especially Sherlock and Mycroft, I mean, Mycroft is the older brother, and he's described as being much cleverer, but also
Hmm.
kind of lazy, and he doesn't really get out much. And although sometimes big brotherly, I mean, sometimes the family dynamics is not necessarily caring towards each other.
Yes. Now, Mycroft is challenging. My feeling is, and the beauty of characters like Holmes and Mycroft is I've had a suspicion for many years that everyone who reads the book builds a slightly different picture, especially of Mycroft, because we see him so much less than Sherlock. Um, I felt he was sold just a fraction short in the first film. He was a bit overly emotional, loses his temper a little too easily. Although equally, that does tie in with he shares with Sherlock an inability to deal with normal people. So, that those frustrated moments with Enola probably stem from the why is she not doing the logical thing and just listening to me? Because I'm the intelligent one here. You two are idiots, relatively speaking. and, but I still think that she outsmarts him just a little bit too easily. But they do tighten him up for the brief moments you see him in the second film. I think he's somewhat. It's more the Mycroft I'm expecting, but he's very well played, and I like the way that he is portrayed because I think in the film he's meant to represent a kind of a mix of the old guard, and that comes through very clearly. Every time he reads about the vote for extending the franchise, it's ridiculous. I mean, he won't go to the same extreme lengths that some other characters will do to prevent it, but you can tell he thinks it's a bad idea. You can't give proles the vote. It leads to bad places. But as for Sherlock, that's a more complicated one. And Henry Cavill played that role really well, I thought. Brilliantly done. I think there's just the right balance of human compassion in him, but there's also that perfect, manners and civility, and that very sort of just so business face. I don't think I see anything in the film that ever phases him. Or not really. He might be momentarily surprised, like when in the end when he goes into Lestrade and says, "Oh, you have to arrest this person," and Lestrade says, "Oh, yeah, that you're right, but your sister got there just before
Yeah.
you did." And he goes, "Oh, okay," and he's smiling when he leaves. So I think he's a very well played Sherlock Holmes. I wish we could have seen a bit more of him, but then I equally understand why we don't because it's mainly Enola's story, so it's fair enough. But overall, I think it was done well. How did you feel
I
about the treatment of the?
I fully agree with you, and I also liked how because he needs to find Enola as well. He and in a way look after her. So there is a concern, and as he says, she's a minor. Um, but I like how he is also capable of interacting with, for example, some of the mother's friends and the women in the story. That,
Mm.
he is not like Mycroft entirely dismissive of them. Uh, and the only woman really he is interacting with is that headmistress at the school where he's trying to send Enola to. Um,
Yeah.
but so only really women who works or operates within the system of men. But I like that Sherlock is capable of doing that as well. And he also sees and unlike Mycroft, sees and understands her brilliance. And where he is the master of deduction, she has been brought up more with ciphering and decoding. Which is
Mm.
an interesting little twitch because it means they actually, I mean, if they could work together, they actually would make quite a brilliant detective pair. But you also understand why Enola says no, because she wants to be something in her own right, which add to that female perspective of the story. So no, I actually think they found that balance really well, and the also the internal humor was done brilliantly, I found.
Yeah. Yes, there's so many little funny bits. I think you're smiling throughout the film, and some of them are so fleeting, and brilliantly inserted into tense moments. I mean, there's the bit where in the first film where Tewkesbury rescues her from the boarding school and has and I think he's quite relieved when the two schoolgirls are summoned to take the basket to the headmistress's office. And one of them, as they're dragging it along, goes, "What is in here? It weighs a ton." And then the camera pans to Enola in the interior going, "You saying I'm fat?"
No, it's done really, really well. I think those little moments are really, really well, and that's that constant balance, as you said, especially in the second movie, between danger and then really funny moments. And I think also her mother and I've forgotten her name now. What's the name of the mother's friend?
Oh, is it Edith? No,
Edith.
no, Edith.
Yes, it
Yes,
is.
it is Edith, isn't it?
She's fantastic too. She's amazing too. But that balance there, the humor there between them, is fantastic as well. That, oh, it's the Holy Trinity, love and the
Yes, yeah. I mean that the jailbreak where they rescue Enola in the second film, it strays towards the ludicrous, but I think they kept it together.
funny sequence. That it really, really is. And then Andrew, there is one more character from the books that we get to know with a funny little twist. Myra Troy, or should I say Moriarty, who is
Yes.
a female in this version. We shouldn't be surprised.
Yes, well, I thought it was a very good call because, like Holmes, Moriarty has been played so many different ways by so many different people. I think the stories would have really struggled with a conventional Moriarty. So it's quite a work of genius to yes. Is it Myra Troy?
Yes.
Oh, so close. But I didn't suspect until I mean, Claire was much faster off the mark than me, and other people who've watched the film say, "Oh yeah, I knew it was Moriarty," but
Yeah,
I didn't
you
until the
know,
big
I
reveal. I was,
I didn't, and I actually think that's brilliant because that's her entire role. She's in the background all the time,
Hmm,
and that's the entire point. She sees everything that's going on, and she sees the world of men. She sees, also the fraud they're committing. But there's not really anything she can do about it, even though she has a brilliant brain. Until, of course, she makes this thing up and she manages to play them all. And I actually think that was brilliant because she is the one in the background, and we see her almost from the beginning of the story, and yet
yes,
we don't really see her. So she's there, but she's
yeah.
not there.
It's a very different film when you watch it the second time, knowing what you do, and actually, in a way, other than Enola herself, I think in the second film she ends up possibly being the most compelling character. What once you realize who she is,
Yes.
because I mean, yeah, there's characters like Sarah from the factory who are, major counterfoils to Enola, I mean, for the longest time, I didn't know what Sarah's game was. I sort of veered between thinking bad person, good person, bad person. Um, but yeah, no, you're right. Moriarty, or yeah, Moriarty does trump them all. Um,
Oscar Lighters as well.
yes, thank you, Oscar. Yes, he was actually sitting on my lap when I watched the film. So yeah, you can add stuff, Kat.
Absolutely. Absolutely. No, that is true. And I think we are also distracted brilliantly as viewers because we try to figure out about Sarah's story. And that's where Enola's focus is all the time. Who was she meeting? Where was she going? And then finally, when the mother comes in and that break away from the jail, she starts adding questions like, look for what she knows. Why are they so keen to get this girl back? Match girls disappear all the time, but this one, why are they so keen to get her back or to find her? What does she know? And she even says she's a troublemaker, meaning she knows something that could be dangerous. So all our focus is on Sarah, and on
Yeah.
what's going on with her story.
Yeah, and there are so many clever strands because the first time I watched the second film, and I think the second, in terms of the sheer number of clever strands in the story, the second film does a lot better than the first. I mean, William Lyon and his role in the whole thing. I spent so much of the film tempted to think that he's just another sinister aristocrat who's up to no good. Even when you start to realize actually he may be working against the system, or is he just pretending to? And yes, like Sarah, he distracted me a lot. I was trying to work out what on earth his role was, which made watching the film a lot of fun. Even if it was still that head slap moment at the end, we go, nope, nope, just as well I'm not the detective because I would have been badly, badly wrong.
Another thing about him, we don't get to see him very much. It's only
No,
really at the ball, and then there are, I think, a couple of flashbacks to Sarah and him together. But we don't get to see him very much until they find him dead. And
yeah.
then even in that moment, they have that funny little encounter that stay unemotional. I love that little. Yeah, I know there's a dead man in the chair. Just stay unemotional.
Yes, it's like, it happens to me all the time. It's just another Tuesday at work.
No, that's true. How did you feel about? I'm not going to say his whole name, but Tewkesbury, the Viscount of what's his?
Oh, whatever made up county, and yes, yeah, I struggle to
Marquis
remember
of
it all.
Bassingweather or something.
Basilweather, thank you. Yes, no, I'll just call him Viscount Tewkesbury because I think you can get away with that. I like his character. When Enola first encounters him in the first film, and a little bit through what follows, I was worried that he was just going to be another cardboard cutout idiot aristocrat. And it's actually really refreshing as that film goes on to see what a rounded character he actually is, and how he is very much his own man. He's very and it's interesting. I think in much the way Enola and Sherlock would complement each other when they work together, he and Enola complement each other quite well. I mean, in a bit of a counter to the macho Victorian world, I mean, it amuses me that she's the fist fighter and he's
Yes.
a little bit on the wimpier side, but it doesn't mean he's not without brains. I mean, even at the end of the first film, where you don't see it till it matters, but him having the presence of mind to put on the armor before he confronts the Duchess and sort of goes, what's going on here, and it's that same. It's not a practical genius, but he's a good ideas guy, and because he studies botany, he has even more amazing tangential ideas that tend to save the day in small ways. And as a politician too, as a young budding politician.
Because he's coming of age as well with Enola, but I think he makes a good. So he's almost. He's kind of in the same. When we meet him the first time, he's in the same shoe as Enola because they are both escaping.
Mm.
But his path, of course, being very different, and he has his very different reasons. So the fact that they're both escaping brings them together. They're just both trying to get away from someone. But I think the fact that they both have to try and find their feet in a world where they don't know anything or anyone or don't belong. And Enola has never been to London before, and he has never really existed outside Tewkesbury Hall, you know, and so they're both of them completely out of, like fish out of water, you know, they're completely outside their element. And that brings them together with their very different backgrounds. And I think he's probably in the films, I understand, a little bit more of a love interest than he is in the books. But I actually think he makes up a nice. He's not opposite Enola, but there's a nice balance there that hasn't got anything to do with her own family. So it's not just Enola and Sherlock; it's also Enola and Tewkesbury in that little world.
Yes, yeah, and it's very beautifully done in the films. Yes, I know what you mean. In the books, they're more friends, or at least that's the. I've only read the first two, so I don't know whether that relationship deepens in the others. But yes, he's an interesting character and a good character balance. I think if the films develop a romance between the two of them, it would work very well. As long as they carry on with the excellent writing that they're doing so far, no reason why we should. I do know film 3 is on the way.
Oh, good. That's going to be
Yeah, yeah, and hats off to Millie Bobby Brown. She really is quite a rising star. As I was very impressed, she directed these films as well as acting in
Oh,
them,
she
or at
did.
least I believe she directed them. Maybe I might have got that mixed up, but she had a hand in the creative
Wow.
side of it.
And she's very young. That's really impressive.
Yeah,
That's
yeah, yeah.
she is. You're right. She's brilliantly cast. There was actually one thing I wanted to ask you about as well, Andrew, with regards to that, because there is a storytelling tool which is that breaking down the fourth wall.
Hmm.
And that's always a tricky thing to do because it depends so much on the character. You really need a strong character to do that, someone who can snap in and out. And sometimes she's directly talking to the camera, like asking us something. And sometimes she's just sort of giving a knowing look or something like that. But the moment you realize it's used as a storytelling tool is those moments where she is either in danger or feeling fragile. She's not talking to the camera. And that sort of adds to her isolation in those moments
Hmm.
where she feels alone somehow. But I wanted to ask you about what you feel about those kind of tools, because if I go to, you know, the BBC adaptation of Sherlock with Benedict Cumberbatch, we had those numbers turning up on the screens and visual turning up on the screens when he was making deductions so that we could
Yeah.
follow his brain. And in the film version, the one with Robert Downey Jr., we have those slow down sequences where, especially when action is happening, where we get to catch up with his brain. So it's literally a slow motion version of the same scene that we get to in order to catch up with what's going on in his mind. And with Enola, we have this breaking down of the fourth wall and her
Hmm.
in her thinking process, where she's kind of talking to us as if she's talking to her own brain in those moments as she's making deductions or trying to figure out what's going on. And as a storytelling tool, I wanted to ask you, how did you feel about that? How did you feel? Did you feel that worked well?
Yes, that's a really excellent question, Jane. I think it did. I'm generally quite a fan of breaking the fourth wall in most films, and I think broadly speaking, I've seen it done well more often than I've seen it done badly, and I think it's quite nice. For me personally, it heightens my sense of inclusion, which is always nice when a character talks to you. But I can also rationalize it because quite a few people I know, when they're trying to work through an idea or tidy up a thought process, they will often just speak it to the air or even address it to themselves. You know, I know a lot of people say talking to yourself is not a sign of good things, but I think it can be a useful tool. So it seems very natural, but you're absolutely right. It needs the right actor to do it, and Millie Bobby Brown carries it off really, really well. Yeah, she's in good company with a lot of others who do, but it is very hard, almost deceptively hard to do. And she is so effortless. I would love to know how many takes were required for some of those scenes, because as you say, it's a very quick snap from one to the other, and it has to look absolutely seamless. Otherwise, it does break things a bit.
That's true.
Yeah. Do you think it was? Oh,
I
sorry.
found it. Did you feel it made her, I think, sometimes more relatable, because you kind of not just followed her thought process, but also followed her insecurities. She was sort of, I think this is how it works, or do you know any ideas? She's just suddenly going to any ideas, you know.
Yeah.
So it both displayed her doubts, but also her thought process. So in a way, it made her probably more relatable.
Yes, it does, and because she is the only character who does it, as you say, you really she's the one you end up being drawn to the most. And yes, the point about her vulnerabilities is also very, very important, because whatever the merits of it or not, I think we're living in a period of backlash where people are starting to well, they started disliking the infallible hero back in the 80s, although infallible heroes staggered on into the present day. But I do like someone who doesn't have all the answers, and who sometimes stumbles and sometimes gets into situations where they think, oh no, I don't think I'm actually going to make it out of this. And who does occasionally need an assist to get out. And yes, the whole bit where the times where she does say, you know, any ideas, because I haven't got any right now, is so humanizing, because you go, oh yes, you know, you're an extremely capable individual, but you know, as with the rest of the human race, you've got your limits.
You're raising another interesting one there, Andrew, because the original stories, of course, were written by Dr. Watson. So we get to know Sherlock Holmes's adventures through Dr. Watson, and he's describing Holmes's genius without always fully understanding it himself. Whereas in Enola, she is the main storyteller and the narrator. And I think I'm wondering if that might not also be a reason why we kind of directly get into her world right away. Because there is in Sherlock Holmes, it's almost like he's a little bit, there's a distance to him, because you're never fully in his mind, partly because he's not the one telling the stories, Dr.
Yeah.
Watson is, but also because he's kind of a little too fast. So you never quite reach him or catch up with him or his thought process, and neither does Dr. Watson.
Yes, that I think that's very true, and it helps add to the air of mystery that surrounds him, and which makes him so compelling. And actually, I think it's something they largely maintain in the films, because we do get Enola's perspective of Holmes, and sometimes it's a very personal perspective. But you're right, it's still the same as looking, in a way, it's the same as looking at him through Watson's eyes. He's still in many respects a remote character, and it actually helps him maintain that air of slight mystery. I know he has a bit of a moment of vulnerability in the second film, where I think he's quite drunk when Enola finds him. And okay, I know in the books Holmes had his moment. There's that time where Watson finds him in the opium den, and you think, yeah. So I see what they were doing there, but at the same time, Holmes is a man of absolutely iron control. So I still don't quite know how I feel about that bit. But largely speaking, he is that mysterious person. Where am I going with this? There was something, but yes, in a way, she stands in as a very able, a replacement for Watson as the storyteller.
That's We get to see Watson, don't we, in the very last scene in the second movie.
We do, Paul Watson. I mean, when I yeah, because was it Himesh Patel who plays him, who's a relatively young
Yes,
actor who
yes,
is,
right.
yeah. I hope Watson gets a chance to shine in film 3 because yeah, we get this teaser of him,
Yeah,
and
we do a little bit. And you know, the original stories were so based on that relationship between the two.
mm,
And I know Holmes is not, you know, Sherlock is not the main character in this one. But every single story and film since has had that relationship between the two of them as the main kind of almost like the main character in a way in its own right.
yes, yes, and Watson is a very important role. So I mean, what I would love to see is if he does have more of a presence in the third film, and I really hope he does, the nature of the relationship they develop between him and Enola, because in a sense, the one thing that does come through the way the stories are written, I don't know if Conan Doyle intended this, but there are times when I feel Watson's almost protective of Holmes. Is sort of, I'm the storyteller, I'm the chronicler, and I'm the only one with this level of privileged access to Sherlock. And now all of a sudden in this storyline there's a sister who, normally a sister would just be a background person in Victorian Britain, but this is a highly capable sister who's very educated and very literate and has her own perspective of Holmes. And I just wonder, I mean, it may not be an issue at all, but it would be very interesting if there's just the tiniest bit of friction between them.
That is true, actually. That would be interesting. That would be really, really interesting because in a way you don't really get that much in the relationship between the three siblings because Mycroft is sort of he's a little bit the odd one out.
Yes.
So you don't really fully get that in between the three of them. But I think Watson could be a really interesting playmate as well in a story. I hope they bring him in more in the third film.
Yes, yeah. I mean, it would be a shame not to, because having introduced him now, it's like you've got to use him, guys. You've got to use him. It'd be so strange if you don't. Yeah.
And but it also says a lot about because you know when Holmes meet him there in that very last scene, he's expecting Enola, but instead of coming over herself, she's sending a flatmate, you know.
Yes.
And there you are, go and live with him. And he's even Sherlock again is smiling a little bit at the thought of that.
Yes, and that was quite a nice touch too. Actually, I'd completely forgotten that moment. So thanks, Jane. um, yeah, no, it's a good setup, I think.
It is, it is. I think they've done brilliantly on the casting.
They certainly have. Yeah, I really adore Helena Bonham Carter as an actor anyway, and I think she played the role of Mrs. Holmes to perfection. Although I think she'd probably prefer Euphoria. It's the only
Well,
name
that's
she
right,
seems to.
Euphoria, yes.
Mm,
And I love,
yeah, and
you know, Enola is alone spelled backwards, and then she realizes maybe I shouldn't put too much into that.
no, I love the bit where she reverses Sherlock's and Mycroft names, going, no, these are just gibberish. Okay.
Doesn't make sense at all.
No,
No,
no.
that's and her world perspective at you know when we first meet her and she's introducing her brothers to the home that's her world, that's the only thing she knows about, and there's something quite sweet and innocent about that before she is then forced to leave or to flee in order to find the mother. But it also gives the mother a perfect role because she has not just raised Enola to be very independent, but also she is part of something bigger. And she's
Hmm.
got stuff she got to go and do, you know.
Yes. Yeah, it's an odd one because in a way, Enola hints at it. Certainly in the first film, where she more than once she says to Tewkesbury, "My mother may my mother made me this, or my mother, conditioned me to be this. My mother made me the fighter, that kind of thing. It does get you thinking, yes, obviously. I very much enjoyed grappling with the question of, yes, obviously a lot of love has been showered on Enola, and, all the skills and learning she's been given are part of, making her the best she can possibly be. But I also can't help wondering if her mother had another motive, which is, training Enola up to be some sort of prototype of the new strong independent woman that's about to take Victorian and Edwardian Britain by storm. I mean, she probably was inspired to do it by some of the women she met in her suffragette circle. So
there is also an element of Enola being more action driven than Sherlock. I mean, Sherlock is an old boxer, but Enola certainly can fight as well. And you mentioned this as well, Andrew, in relation to Tewkesbury, that she's, she doesn't stand away for a fight from a fight. And in a way, that's something that that works in her relationship with Sherlock as well, whenever they team up to solve the case, because he's kind of the more calculated, deductive one. And sometimes she doesn't have a problem, dressing up or dressing as a boy in order to get in somewhere, or dressing up in order to go to a ball, or whatever is required. You wouldn't see Sherlock doing that.
No, I like the very different approaches they have to disguises. And I know Sherlock doesn't do any of his famous disguises in the Enola Holmes movies, but he has his sort of dress up box in the books, doesn't he? Whereas Enola, just as such an opportunist, you'll go up to someone like, "Here's £5. Do you want to swap clothes with me?"
It's a bit spontaneous when it happens, isn't it?
Yes, and I quite like that about her, because you're right. In a contrast to Sherlock, he would never do that. He would plan it to the nth degree, and he would know exactly what he was going to put on himself. She's like, "Yeah, you'll do."
Yes. And there is also, there's always those moments in the Sherlock stories where he is, for a moment, outsmarted by someone else. Of course, Moriarty, but also, I mean, he does meet a woman in the original story, Irene Adler, and there are. I actually think it was a stroke of brilliance that the female Moriarty in the Enola stories managed to outsmart all of them, Holmes and Enola, Sherlock and Enola together, and all of them together.
Yes.
That was brilliant. And even towards the end, we get to know from a newspaper article that she has managed to flee prison.
Yes, I think it was brilliantly done. I mean, the triumph of Irene Adler when she was first published would have sent shockwaves out, because that there is a sort of low-level presence, actually maybe a bit higher than low-level, in Victorian literature of heroines who triumph against terrible people despite the inherent weaknesses of their sex, quote unquote. This does not represent my views. I'm just going to hasten to tell all you guys that but yes, to have a villain. And of course, by the time that story came out, Holmes already had quite a following. And, like all fanboys and fangirls at the time, they would have been horrified at the thought that he could be outsmarted. I think actually in one of the later stories, a prospective client protests to him, "But you've never been beaten." He says, "I've been beaten 4 times, 3 times by men and once by a woman." So actually, yeah, there's such genius in making Moriarty female. And also, it's not really breaking any Holmesian precedents, because we have Irene Adler.
That is true. That's a brilliant point, actually. That's a really, really good point. No, I really enjoyed these stories overall. I thought they were well put together, and they were very entertaining, and they managed to find a really nice balance between mystery and adventure and humor, and all of it put together really nice. So that was really, really good. Andrew, I guess the $1 million question is £1,000,000, sorry. Euros, whatever.
I don't know, $1 million. Let's work this out in 1890s money. Call it £200,000.
have a favorite, Holmes?
Oh, out of the many who've been out there, oh wow, Jane, that is a
No,
blinder
it's
of a
a
question.
killer
It's a
question.
superb question. Um, this is where I sort of stagger to the corner and beg for a timeout to think about it. Oh my goodness.
I know. It's such an evil question to ask anyone.
Wow. Yes. Do you know what? I'm going to say that I don't have any one single favorite Holmes. I've seen a lot of the classic Holmeses. I've seen Robert Downey Jr., I've seen Benedict Cumberbatch, and I've now, of course, seen Henry Cavill play him in Enola Holmes. I won't commit to having a favorite because I think everyone who I've seen play him brings something very different to the role. And it's a tribute to what a complex character he is, that every one of these people highlights something different. Well, they emphasize certain bits of him at the expense of others, and they're still really good portraits, all of them. But no, I can't. I would struggle to actually create a sort of interview type scoring system and
Did
put
you
one
ever
above.
watch, Andrew, any of those Jeremy Brett versions from, oh, how old are they now?
Oh my gosh, the Brett Holmes. Gosh, they go way back, don't they? I can't remember when they go. I've seen a couple of those,
Yeah.
and they were good. But even his sterling performance, I think, doesn't. How do you feel about how would you answer that question,
Oh,
Jane?
I actually think you gave a really brilliant answer because I've liked all of them. They are very different, and I think that just goes back to the genius in the way the stories were written. That you can do so much with this character. The first one I was introduced to was Jeremy Brett back in the day, and I think are they going back to the 70s?
I think they are. The sets and everything do have a very 70s look about them.
And I think maybe they followed, because it was a TV series, it had the advantage of being able to follow each story kind of in detail. So every episode was a story. Uh,
Mm,
and it meant you could dive into the original stories. And I think also the way he was portrayed probably reflected the way he was written quite well. And then Brett played him in this kind of very closed, sinister, not really revealing anything, very stone-faced kind of way. And he did so brilliantly. But he was for a long time the only version that I had until kind of Holmes became popular again. But I do agree with you. I think every single one of the Holmeses, whether it be on TV or film, has added something to him that we
mm.
that made him modern and relevant again, but never took anything away from the stories. And maybe that's the genius of those books that you can do that and you can keep like Shakespeare, you can keep doing modern versions and new versions and place them back in the Victorian era or in modern times or whatever you want to do with them. They somehow still work as stories.
Yes, yeah. I mean, it'll be interesting to see what people come up in the future because I'm sure there'll be so many more Holmes adaptations in our lifetimes, and and going by what I've seen in the past, I look forward to seeing them all because I've
Yeah.
not seen a bad one yet.
No, likewise. And I kind of hope so because it means the stories will remain relevant somehow and good entertainment.
Yes, yeah. And I think the universal themes they tap into will never go away. Yeah, there's so much that goes on in the background and sort of the bowels of society that
And also, I think for all his not very good social skills, uh, there is a lot of psychology, human psychology in the stories. And I think that's something that will always interest people.
yes, yeah, I think you're absolutely right there.
And it's just good storytelling in many ways. Andrew, how do we wrap up?
Well, as always, this is the difficult part, isn't it? Yes, usually I always pray for a pithy quote to come to mind, but it never does. And
Oh, I
because
got
I don't think, is it actually said in the films, does Sherlock Holmes at any point in either of the two films say elementary? Obviously not to Watson because he's not in it till the end of the second film, but I don't think he
I
does, you know.
don't think he does.
No, that's
He does have some brilliant quotes, like, for example, I love, you see Watson, but you don't observe. I love that.
Hmm.
I love, because
Yes.
I like that one. And
Mhm.
no, I don't believe he ever does. There, I do remember laughing a bit when I read the original stories in English the first time, because there is a word that's used quite a lot, but in a different way from now, which is the word ejaculated.
Oh yes,
Have-
yes.
have-
Ejaculating wildly to shout, but
There is a
yes.
wonderful moment when Holmes is ejaculating from a second floor window.
Yeah.
And I just remember that cannot be the word. My English is not good enough, but then I kind of understood what was. But there are words that are different, and that's kind of lovely and entertaining in their own right.
Language changes and we all smile. I remember the first time I came across it, and it was one of the other stories. I know the one you mean, but yeah, they were either running from or they were pursuing someone who was ejaculating wildly, and yeah, everybody's thinking it. We're just saying it. God bless the late 20th and early 21st centuries.
Well, it's a wonderful word. It's a wonderful word that it's very powerful. That Holmes, he ejaculated. That's
Yes. It's yeah, so loaded with meanings that yeah. Yes, be gone, mental images, be gone.
There we go. There we go. And then I gotta say, my favorite story is probably still The Hound of Baskerville, because it's a classic for a reason. And there is that wonderful Conan Doyle did this brilliantly. I have a weakness for one-liners, and he did them so brilliantly. That whole sentence where he captures everything in that story, where he goes, "Mr. Holmes, it was the footsteps of a gigantic hound." That
Yeah.
sentence is bloody brilliant, not just because it gets Sherlock Holmes interested, but also because there's so many questions there. Why hound? Why not dog? And footsteps in themselves are always interesting because it means someone was here, but who and why? And all of a sudden, all of this opens up. And he was brilliant at that, Conan Doyle, in those short stories, to just capture you right away.
Yes, he was, and actually, I think The Hound of the Baskervilles is one. It's certainly in the top 10 of the most popular Sherlock Holmes stories. It's up there with the. I keep forgetting its title. I keep calling it the Irene Adler story because that's another hugely
Yes,
popular one.
it's it's a
Um,
it's a scandal. It's called a scandal of
Scandal in Belgravia, I think.
radio. Yes, that's the.
Thank you.
I think that's the one, isn't it?
Yeah, a scandal in somewhere in London, somewhere posh, expensive in London.
Yes, someone cash and expensive in London.
Yeah, because the only other favorite of mine, and this is quite an obscure one. I mean, not obscure. A lot of Holmes aficionados know it, but you know the Beryl Coronet,
Yes, I
where
knew.
yeah, where I like that one because of the familial tension, where for the longest time the father is convinced that it's his son who's been involved in the attempted theft. And I was quite young when I read that one, and I felt real physical relief when Holmes solved the case and
Yes.
father and son are reconciled, and you just think, oh, thank God for that.
Oh yeah, no, you're right. There were some brilliant ones. There was one that stuck to my mind as well when I was little, and I watched it in the Jeremy Brett version as well, and I have no idea what it's called, but it was, of course, a murder had been committed, and Sherlock was solving it, and it ended up being a woman who had committed suicide uh,
Mm,
by shooting herself, and she shot herself on a bridge, and she tied the pistol to a stone and threw that over the edge of the bridge, so that when after she shot herself, the pistol disappeared into the river.
yes.
No one could find the murder weapon. And I cannot remember the plot now or why, but I just remember that one being fascinating because everyone was looking for a murderer that ended up not existing.
Yes, I remember that one. I actually remember watching it on television ages ago. Um,
Someone will remember.
yeah, guys, help us out because my memory is really
There's
not
a lot
playing up to
And
date.
there are some brilliant, brilliant, brilliant ones. There truly are some brilliant ones. Guys, let us know your favorite written story, and also if you have a favorite, Holmes, you might have. Hi, Oscar.
Yeah. Hello, Oscar. I think he keeps trying to tell me his favorite, but and to wave his bum in my face. Thank you.
The mystery of the missing cat, or
Yes.
turning
Yeah.
cat, or
Yes. It's most strange, Mr. Holmes. My black cat, every time I turn down the lights, he just disappeared and don't know what to make of it. Can you help me? I fear this will keep going on.
oh, Oscar. What is he saying? He's being silly.
He is being silly. I think, wait, what's that, Oscar? Your favorite one was where the ship disappears in the end. Okay.
Oh, that's a good one.
The five orange pips, that's Oscar's favorite.
Like that one. Like that one.
Oscar, can I? Sorry, I've just had a Watson moment where I'm going to borrow his tail for it. No, he didn't like that. He is a very tolerant cat, but he did not like that, Mr. Holmes. No.
Hands off tail.
Yeah, it's a miracle I'm still alive. I can't think of many cats who would let me get away with that twice.
Oh, good cat, Oscar. Good cat. Oh,
Yeah.
let us know, guys, what you thought of these and what you made of the Enola stories. Did you like them? Did you read the books? What did you think of that? Are you looking forward for more?
Yes, yes. We'd love to hear from you. As always, we've done all the talking so far, so please do chip in, everybody. We'd love to hear from you.
Yes. And
And
Andrew,
so would Oscar. Don't do it for us, do it for Oscar.
yes, absolutely. Andrew, as always, it's so brilliant doing these with you.
You
Thank you
too,
so
Jane.
much.
You too. Thank you so much. It's been wonderful. And yeah, this one's definitely been one of the most enjoyable. A great choice of films. I really enjoyed watching these
They
again.
were so
And
much fun. They were so much fun. And let us know what you think, and we'll be back for more soon, I hope.
we will. We need to get choosing the next one, don't we?
Absolutely, absolutely. Take care, everyone, and thanks so much, Andrew.
Yeah, bye everyone. Thanks, Jane. A pleasure as always. Take care and see you again soon. Yes, Oscar.